The opulent silence of the Gilded Grill was a carefully curated performance, a symphony of hushed conversations, the gentle clink of silver on bone china, and the distant, almost subliminal sizzle of prime steaks. It was a silence that cost $400 a plate. Tonight, however, that silence was shattered. The sound wasn't a crash or a shout, but a wail, a thin, piercing note of pure, unadulterated anguish that sliced through the restaurant's decorum like a shard of glass. Arthur Sterling, a man whose name was etched in steel and concrete on half the skyscrapers in New York City, felt every eye in the room turn to his table. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in the granite facade of his face. His 7-year-old daughter, Clara, was rigid in her velvet-trimmed chair, her hands clamped over her ears, her small body trembling as she let out another heart-wrenching sob. This was his recurring nightmare, played out on the most public of stages. He had tried everything, the top child psychologists, the behavioral therapists with 6-month waiting lists, the nannies flown in from Switzerland. None of them could stop the screaming. He was seconds from scooping her up, from enduring the gauntlet of pitying and judgmental stares for the 100th time. That was when a waitress, a young woman with flour on her cheek and the profound weariness of 1,000 double shifts in her eyes, did the unthinkable. She didn't approach with a coloring book or a piece of candy. She didn't offer a placating, meaningless smile. She stopped, closed her eyes for a brief second, as if listening to a distant radio, and then began to hum. It was a simple, haunting melody, a forgotten lullaby from a bygone era. She tapped a rhythm on a nearby water glass with her pen, a soft, structured beat. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Clara's wailing faltered, catching in her throat. She slowly, tentatively, lowered her hands. Arthur froze, his hand hovering over his daughter's shoulder. He watched as the waitress, this complete nobody in a starched, ill-fitting uniform, held his daughter's gaze from across the room and, with nothing more than a sound, began to reassemble her shattered world. He didn't know it yet, but this young woman, who looked as if she carried the weight of the city on her shoulders, held the key to his daughter's mind. A key that would not only unlock his child's silence, but would also expose a rot so deep within his own perfect life that it threatened to bring his entire empire crashing to the ground. The dinner service at the Gilded Grill was a brutal ballet, and Amelia Russo, mere to the few who bothered to learn her name, was one of its most practiced, if reluctant, dancers. Her movements were a study in efficiency, honed by years of necessity. A swerve to avoid a busboy, a dip to retrieve a fallen napkin, a seamless pivot to deliver a plate of seared scallops, all while maintaining the serene, unobtrusive expression the job demanded. At 22, she possessed a grace that felt out of place amidst the clatter and culinary arrogance. Her dark hair was coiled in a tight, functional bun, and her uniform, perpetually smelling of truffle oil and desperation, did little to flatter a frame that was more wiry than slender. Russo, Table 12 needs their check, and the Van Dorens are asking for you specifically. Don't keep them waiting, barked Mr. Finch, the maitre d', a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He managed the Gilded Grill less like a restaurant and more like a strategic military outpost, and Mia was merely a foot soldier. "On it, Mr. Finch," Mia murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She moved toward the imperious Van Doren table, her mind 1,000,000 miles away. She wasn't thinking about the wine pairings or the dessert specials. She was mentally rehearsing the fingering for Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her fingers twitching almost imperceptibly against the side of her serving tray. It was a habit, a ghost of a life she once thought was her destiny. No one here knew about the acceptance letter from Juilliard, yellowing in a box under her bed. They didn't know it had arrived the same week a drunk driver had stolen her parents, both celebrated violinists with the New York Philharmonic, from the world. They didn't know she'd traded a concert grand piano for a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens and a promising career for the responsibility of raising her then 10-year-old brother, Leo. To the patrons of the Gilded Grill, she was furniture that brought them food, an invisible cog in the machine of their luxury. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open, admitting a man who didn't just enter a room, but conquered it. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Mia's rent for a year. His hair was the color of steel, his shoulders broad, and he carried himself with an air of absolute, unassailable authority. It was Arthur Sterling. Mia knew the face from the covers of business magazines at the newsstand she passed every day. Sterling Construction was a dynasty, a titan of industry that had reshaped the city's skyline. But the titan looked frayed at the edges. His tie was slightly askew, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were clouded with a deep, weary frustration. Clinging to his hand was a little girl, Clara, a fragile doll in a navy blue dress, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unfocused, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. "Just a quiet dinner, Clara. I promise," Arthur whispered, his voice a low rumble of pleading. "Nanny Agatha left this morning. We just need to get through this." Finch, who normally fawned over high-profile guests, seemed to hesitate, a flicker of apprehension crossing his face. He led them to a secluded booth in the back, Mia's section. She approached with her notepad, her professional mask firmly in place. She saw the way Arthur scanned the room, a subtle check for reporters or rivals. She saw the way Clara stared at the intricate pattern of the damask wallpaper, her lips moving in a silent count. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," Mia said, her voice soft and even. "May I get you something to drink to start?" Arthur didn't look at her. His focus was entirely on the menu, a shield against the world. "Scotch, neat. For her, just water. And the chicken paillard. No sauce, plain. And quickly." Mia nodded, but her gaze lingered on Clara. "And for you, sweetie, the mashed potatoes are very good." Clara didn't answer. She began to hum, a low, single note that vibrated in her chest. "She doesn't speak," Arthur said sharply, the words a dismissal. He finally looked up at Mia, and she saw the raw exhaustion in his eyes. "To anyone. Just get the order, please." Mia retreated, the rebuff stinging more than she expected. As she relayed the order to the kitchen, she watched them. Clara wasn't just humming. She was creating a small, ordered world for herself. She took the silverware and arranged it by size, perfectly parallel. She tapped her water glass, a light, rhythmic pinging. Ping. Ping, ping. Ping. A pattern. A code. Mia recognized it instantly. It was the rhythm of a simple Bach minuet her mother used to play for her. She returned with the drinks just as a busboy, hurrying past, dropped a tray of champagne flutes. The crash was explosive in the hushed room. It was the catalyst. Clara's hum became a shriek. She threw her hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut in agony. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a response to a physical assault of sound. The dissonance, the chaotic shattering, had broken through her fragile defenses. "Clara, stop it!" Arthur hissed, his face flushing a deep crimson. He looked around, mortified. The entire restaurant was staring. "It's just a noise, it's over." "Make it stop!" Clara screamed, her voice raw. "Someone control that child!" A man at a nearby table boomed. A woman gave a theatrical, judgmental sigh. Shame and anger warred on Arthur's face. He reached for Clara, his movement stiff and awkward. "Clara, please, not now. We have to eat." But his touch only made it worse. Clara recoiled, screaming louder, her body rigid with terror. She flailed an arm, knocking her perfectly arranged silverware to the floor with a discordant clatter. The chaos of the scattered silver seemed to amplify her panic. She began to hyperventilate, lost in a storm of sensory overload. "That's it," Arthur said, his voice tight with defeat. He reached for his wallet. "We're leaving." "Wait," Mia said, her voice cutting through the noise with unexpected authority. She stepped forward, ignoring Mr. Finch, who was bearing down on them with a thunderous expression. She ignored the glares of the other diners. Her focus was entirely on the crying child. She didn't kneel. She didn't speak to Clara. Instead, she walked to the service station, picked up 3 empty wine glasses, and placed them on her table. She filled each with a different amount of water. Then, with the handle of a silver spoon, she tapped the first glass, a clear, perfect C. She tapped the second, an E, the third, a G, C, E, G, a C major chord, harmony, order. Clara's screaming stopped. She hiccuped, her tear-filled eyes, wide with astonishment, fixed on Mia. "The noise was ugly," Mia said softly, her voice carrying across the space between them. She wasn't looking at Arthur, only at his daughter. It was out of tune, like this. She scraped the spoon against the side of a glass, creating a harsh, grating sound. Clara flinched. "But this," Mia continued, tapping the 3 notes again in a gentle arpeggio, "has a pattern. It makes sense. The frequencies fit together. It's called harmony." Arthur stared, dumbfounded. He was watching a miracle. He had spent a fortune on experts who had tried to analyze, medicate, and modify his daughter's behavior. This waitress was teaching her music theory. Clara slowly, cautiously, slid out of the booth. She walked toward Mia's table. She pointed a small, trembling finger at the first glass, then the second, then the third. She looked up at Mia, her eyes dark, intelligent pools of understanding. She took a deep breath, and in a voice rusty from disuse, she whispered a single, clear word. "Again." Arthur Sterling dropped his black Amex card. It landed on the plush carpet with a silent thud. He looked at his daughter, who had not uttered a single word to a stranger since her mother's funeral 2 years ago. Then he looked at the waitress, this young woman in a cheap uniform, who had just calmed a hurricane with 3 glasses of water. "How?" The word was a choked whisper. "How did you do that?" Mia finally looked at him, her professional mask gone, replaced by a deep, weary empathy. "She wasn't throwing a tantrum, Mr. Sterling. She was overloaded. The world is too loud, too chaotic for her. She's not broken. She's just listening on a different frequency." Before Arthur could process this, Mr. Finch arrived, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What is the meaning of this spectacle, Rousseau? You are disturbing our guests and making a scene. Get back to your station, now." Mia flinched, the spell broken. She lowered her head, the invisible waitress once more. "Yes, Mr. Finch. I'm sorry." She started to turn away. "Don't move," Arthur commanded. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a collapsing building. Finch froze mid-stride. Arthur stood to his full, imposing height, dwarfing the maître d'hôtel. This woman just accomplished more in 2 minutes than a team of specialists has in 2 years. She will not be returning to her station. He turned his piercing blue eyes back to Mia. "What is your name?" "Amelia," she said quietly. "Mia." "Mia," Arthur repeated, testing the sound of it. "I have hired the best minds in child development. They gave me pamphlets on sensory processing disorder and recommended padded rooms. They told me she was lost in her own world. You built a bridge to it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim platinum business card. "I don't know what they pay you here," he said, his gaze sweeping over the opulent dining room with sudden distaste, "but I will pay you 10 times that. Starting tomorrow, you will work for me." Mia stared at the card. Arthur Sterling, CEO, Sterling Holdings. 10 times her salary. It was a life-altering number. It would mean Leo could go to the summer science camp he dreamed of. It would mean she could finally fix the leaky roof in their apartment. It would mean she could breathe for the first time in 5 years. But a cold knot of reality tightened in her stomach. "I can't," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Arthur blinked, a man clearly unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "Excuse me?" "I can't just quit," Mia explained, gesturing vaguely at the restaurant. "I have responsibilities, and I'm not a nanny. I'm not a therapist. I'm a waitress." "You're a musician," Arthur stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "That wasn't a lucky guess. That was a C major arpeggio. You have training." I used to play," Mia stammered. Mr. Finch, seeing his authority evaporating, made a fatal error. He tried to reassert it. "Mr. Sterling, if I may," he interjected, his voice slick with false concern. "Miss Russo is a fine waitress, but she has no qualifications, no degree. If you're looking for proper help for your daughter, my sister-in-law runs a very reputable agency." "Be quiet," Arthur snapped, without even looking at him. His eyes remained locked on Mia's. "I have a board meeting in London I have to prepare for. My fiancé is in Milan for Fashion Week. I have no one for Clara. I am offering you $20,000 for 1 week of your time. To start." The figure hung in the air, stunning the nearby tables into absolute silence. $20,000. It was more than she made in a year. Mia looked at Clara. The little girl had moved closer and was now tentatively touching the rim of one of the glasses as if it were a sacred object. She looked up at Mia, her eyes filled not with fear, but with a desperate, silent plea. "Please don't go." Mia slowly, deliberately, began to untie the strings of her apron. "Finch," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time that night. "I'm taking a personal day. If you walk out that door, Russo, don't even think about coming back," Finch sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "You're fired." Mia paused. She looked at the smudged wine glasses, the demanding patrons, the man who had just threatened her livelihood. Then she looked at the little girl who had spoken for the first time in years because of a simple melody. "Okay," Mia said. She let the apron fall from her hands onto the floor. She turned to Arthur. "Where do we begin?" Arthur gestured toward the door, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. As they walked out of the restaurant, leaving the whispers and Mr. Finch's apoplectic rage behind them, Mia felt a tremor of fear mixed with exhilaration. She was stepping out of the suffocating rhythm of her life and into a world of unknown cadence, a world of men in bespoke suits and the silent, lonely children they kept in gilded cages. The ride to the Sterling penthouse was a study in surreal silence. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was larger than Maya's kitchen, smelling of rich leather and quiet power. Clara sat between them, not touching either adult, but her small foot tapped a steady rhythm against the floor mat, the same 1-2-3 beat Mia had tapped on the glass. "So," Arthur began, breaking the quiet as he opened a sleek laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up stock tickers and encrypted emails. "What's the full story, Mia? The Juilliard scholarship you turned down 5 years ago?" Mia's head snapped toward him. "How did you—" "My head of security, Marcus, is very efficient," Arthur said, his tone matter-of-fact. A preliminary background check was running before we even left the restaurant. It's standard procedure. You're going to be around my daughter. I needed to know if you were a con artist or a corporate spy. I'm a waitress who had to drop out of school to raise her brother after our parents died, she said, her voice tight with indignation. It's all in the public record. Yes, Arthur said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It is. I apologize. The precaution was impersonal. He closed the laptop. My late wife, Eleanor, was a pianist, a brilliant one. She's the one who filled this home with music. After she passed, the music stopped, and so did Clara. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. This wasn't just a behavioral problem. It was a wound, a shared grief that had silenced them both. The car glided to a stop before a limestone monolith on Park Avenue, a building so exclusive it didn't have a number, only a name, the Sterling Tower. The doorman, dressed like a 4-star general, rushed to open the door. "Welcome home, Mr. Sterling. Miss Clara." A private elevator whisked them upwards, in unnerving silence, opening directly into the penthouse. Mia's breath caught in her throat. The space was cavernous, a testament to wealth on an unimaginable scale. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city lights a carpet of scattered diamonds. The furniture was minimalist and severe, all sharp angles and shades of grey, white and black. It felt less like a home and more like an art gallery, curated and cold. There were no family photos on the walls, no toys scattered on the floor. The only sign of a child's presence was a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its black lacquer gleaming under a single spotlight, its lid firmly closed. "My office is that way," Arthur said, pointing down a long hall. "I have a series of calls I cannot miss. They will take at least 3 hours. Clara's room is to the left. Her meals are prepared by the chef. Do not let her out of your sight. And please, try to keep things quiet." "You hired me to break the quiet, Mr. Sterling," Mia said, her boldness surprising herself. Arthur paused, his hand on his office door. He looked back at her, his powerful facade cracking for a moment to reveal the desperate father beneath. "Yes," he said softly. "I suppose I did." He closed the door behind him, and the latch clicked with a heavy finality. Mia was alone in the vast, silent expanse with the little girl. "Well," Mia said, turning to Clara and offering a small, genuine smile. "It's just you and me." She gestured toward the imposing piano. "Do you think she remembers us?" Clara stared at the piano, her expression a mixture of longing and fear. She shook her head. "She's probably just sleeping," Mia said gently. "Maybe we should wake her up." Mia walked over to the piano and slowly, reverently, lifted the heavy lid. The pristine ivory keys seemed to glow in the dim light. She sat on the bench and let her fingers hover over them. She didn't play a complex sonata. She played a simple C major scale, the most basic building block of Western music, up and down, clean, clear, and predictable. Clara crept closer, her eyes fixed on Mia's hands. Mia played it again, this time humming along with the notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Clara reached out a tentative finger and pressed the middle C. The note rang out in the silent room. A small, triumphant smile touched her lips. For the next 3 hours there was no screaming. There were no tantrums. There was only the sound of music filling the cold, empty spaces of the penthouse. They started with simple scales and moved on to the Bach minuet from the restaurant. Mia would play a bar, and Clara, with surprising accuracy, would pick out the melody with one finger. It was a conversation without words, a shared language that transcended grief and fear. For the first time in 2 years, the Sterling penthouse felt like a home. But the peace was a fragile composition, destined to be interrupted by a crashing crescendo. The elevator chimed, its doors sliding open with a soft hiss. Mia looked up, expecting Arthur. Instead, a woman who seemed to have been sculpted from ice and ambition strode into the room. She was flawlessly beautiful, dressed in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. It was Beatrice Van Doren, Arthur's fiancée, a society queen whose picture was a permanent fixture on the gossip pages. She was supposed to be in Milan. Beatrice stopped dead, her perfectly plucked eyebrows rising in disdain. Her cold eyes swept over Mia, in her simple jeans and t-shirt, sitting at the priceless piano. Then her gaze fell on Clara, who was not cowering in a corner, but was actually smiling, her finger poised over a piano key. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She didn't see a breakthrough. She saw an intrusion. "Who?" she asked, her voice a silken weapon. "Is this person, and why is she touching my piano?" Mia quickly stood up, feeling like a trespasser. At the restaurant, she dealt with demanding customers. Beatrice Van Doren was a different predator altogether. "I'm Amelia Russo," Mia said, her voice small. "Mr. Sterling hired me to look after Clara." "Arthur hired you?" Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. She glided closer, her expensive perfume enveloping Mia in a cloud of hostility. "He must have been truly desperate. You look like something the cat dragged in." Clara, who had been on the verge of a breakthrough, immediately tensed. She scrambled off the piano bench and hid behind Mia's legs, a familiar fear returning to her eyes. "Clara, get away from her this instant," Beatrice snapped, her voice losing its silken edge and taking on the sharp crack of a whip. "Come here, I won't have you associating with the help." Clara whimpered and pressed closer to Mia. "She's not the help," Mia said, her protective instincts overriding her fear. "And she's frightened of you." Beatrice's face contorted into a mask of fury. "Excuse me? You are a temporary employee, a nobody. You will not speak to me about my future stepdaughter. I have been working for 2 years to get this child under control." "She doesn't need to be controlled," Mia countered, her voice gaining strength. "She needs to be understood. We were making music. She was happy." "She is a public embarrassment," Beatrice hissed, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, mindful of Arthur's office down the hall. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to take her to charity benefits? The screaming, the hysterics. She ruins everything. I have finally convinced Arthur to enroll her at the Atherton Academy in Switzerland. It's a wonderful facility for children with challenges. I will not have some back-alley piano teacher ruining my plans." Atherton Academy. Mia had heard of it. It was a place where the ultra-rich sent their inconvenient children to be forgotten. "She doesn't need a facility in Switzerland," Mia said firmly. "She needs a piano and someone who speaks her language." Beatrice's eyes flashed with a cold, reptilian fire. "You think you're so clever." She looked at the open piano, then at Clara hiding behind Mia. A cruel, calculated idea formed on her perfect lips. "You'll be gone by tonight, and you'll leave in disgrace." Before Mia could react, Beatrice moved with startling speed. She strode to the piano. "This is what I think of your noise," she snarled, and she slammed the heavy, lacquered piano lid down. Crash. The sound was a violent, discordant explosion. Mia yanked Clara back just in time. The lid smashed down onto the keys where Clara's small hands had been only moments before, the impact splintering the wood of the C key. Clara let out a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It was the sound from the restaurant, magnified 100 times. She collapsed to the floor, curling into a fetal position, shaking uncontrollably. The office door flew open. Arthur stormed out, his face a thundercloud. What in God's name is going on out here? He saw the scene in a horrifying tableau, the splintered piano key, his fiancée standing over it with a look of feigned horror, his daughter screaming on the floor, and Mia, pale and trembling, standing between them. "Arthur!" Beatrice cried, rushing to him and burying her face in his chest, her performance flawless. "Thank heavens you're here. It was dreadful." "What happened?" Arthur demanded, his gaze falling on Mia with cold suspicion. "I came home early to surprise you," Beatrice sobbed, pointing a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Mia. "And I found this woman, yelling at Clara. She was trying to force her to play the piano, and when Clara resisted, she got angry and slammed the lid. She could have broken her fingers. The woman is unhinged, Arthur. She's dangerous." Mia's mouth fell open. The lie was so audacious, so complete, it stole the air from her lungs. "That's not true. She did it. She was angry that Clara and I were connecting." Arthur looked from Beatrice, weeping perfectly against his expensive suit, to Mia, the stranger from a restaurant, the girl with no references but a Juilliard rejection letter. "Beatrice has been a part of Clara's life for 2 years, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "Why would she damage a $500,000 piano and terrify the child she is trying to help?" "Because she wants to send her away," Mia cried, desperate. "She told me. She wants to send her to Switzerland to get her out of the way." "Arthur, she's making it all up," Beatrice whispered, looking up at him with wide, tearful eyes. "She's clearly unstable. She probably saw an opportunity to extort money from you and got caught. Look at her." Arthur took a step toward Mia, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The air in the room crackled with tension. "Get out," Arthur said. The words clipped and final. "Mr. Sterling, please," Mia begged, her mind racing. "Look at the logic. Look at the angle of the splintered wood. The force came from the side, not from where I was standing. Check the security. I said, get out!" Arthur roared, his voice echoing in the massive room. "Before I have Marcus escort you out and press charges for child endangerment and destruction of property." Mia looked at Clara, who was still rocking on the floor, lost in her terror. Every fiber of her being wanted to run to the child, to hum the simple melody, to restore the harmony. But she knew if she took another step, Arthur might physically remove her. She swallowed the bitter taste of injustice. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Arthur's icy glare with a final, quiet plea. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "She understands more than you think, Mr. Sterling. Clara hears everything, and she knows the truth." Mia turned and walked to the elevator. As the polished steel doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Beatrice's face over Arthur's shoulder. The tears were gone. A triumphant, venomous smile was in their place. The long descent from the penthouse was like a plunge into an icy abyss. Mia didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mind, always her refuge, was already running the cold, hard numbers. She had $73 in her bank account. Leo's school trip fees were due Friday. The landlord had already sent one warning notice about the rent. The $20,000, a lifeboat that had appeared out of nowhere, had been snatched away, leaving her to drown. She walked out of the Sterling Tower into the harsh afternoon light, the city's cacophony a brutal assault after the quiet harmony she had shared with Clara. She took the subway back to Queens, the screech of the train's wheels against the track, a perfect metaphor for her own frayed nerves. Her apartment was on the top floor of a pre-war building that had long since lost its war with time. The air in the hallway smelled of dust, and her neighbor's garlic-heavy cooking. "Mia, is that you?" a voice called out as she unlocked the 3 deadbolts on her door. Her 16-year-old brother, Leo, was at the small kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a good kid, too smart for their underfunded public school, with a passion for astrophysics that Mia nurtured with every spare dollar she had. "Hey, Rocket Man," she said, forcing a smile. "How was school?" "Fine. Mrs. Davison says my proposal for the state science fair is the best she's ever seen," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. Then his face fell slightly. "The entry fee is due next week. It's $100. He looked down, embarrassed to ask. "And the trip to the planetarium? Don't worry about it. I've got it covered," Mia lied, her heart twisting in her chest. She had been so sure for a few glorious hours that she really did. She dropped her bag on the worn-out sofa. It landed next to a stack of bills, rent, electricity, a final notice from the medical collection agency for their parents' hospital stay. The numbers, usually so orderly and logical, swam before her eyes, a chaotic mess of red ink and impending doom. Meanwhile, across the river, in the sterile penthouse, the silence had returned. But it was a different kind. It was heavy, suffocating, and punctuated by the sound of a child's silent, inconsolable grief. Clara had retreated further into herself than ever before. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't sleep. She sat on the floor in her room, staring at the wall, occasionally letting out a soft, mournful whimper. She refused to go anywhere near the living room, anywhere near the wounded piano. "This is a disaster, Arthur," Beatrice said, pacing the marble floor. She was holding a glass of champagne, looking perfectly composed, the picture of a concerned fiancé. That waitress clearly traumatized her. She set her back months, maybe years. "I've already spoken to Dr. Finch at Atherton. They can take her on an emergency basis. It's for the best. For her." Arthur stood by the window, staring down at the city he had conquered, feeling utterly powerless. He held a glass of scotch, the amber liquid untouched. "She was smiling, Beatrice. Before you came home, she was playing the piano with Mia." "She was being agitated," Beatrice snapped, her composure slipping for a second. "That person was overstimulating her. You saw the result. A violent outburst. What if she had hurt herself? Or me?" She softened her voice, walking over to him and placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Darling, I know this is hard, but you have to be the strong one. You have to make the logical choice, not the emotional one. Atherton is the logical choice." Arthur closed his eyes. The image of the splintered key, the sound of the lid slamming shut, it replayed in his mind. Something felt wrong. Dissonant. Clara wasn't violent. She was gentle. Her meltdowns were implosions of terror, not explosions of rage, and she loved that piano. It was her last connection to her mother. Why would she refuse to even look at it? "I'll consider it," he said, his voice flat. "Don't consider, darling. Decide," Beatrice purred, kissing his cheek. Her lips felt cold. "I'm going to have a bath. All this drama has given me a terrible migraine." Left alone with the oppressive silence, Arthur walked slowly to the grand piano. He ran his fingers over the splintered key. The damage was violent. It would have taken considerable force. He thought of Mia's slender frame. Then he thought of Beatrice's anger, the flash of fury in her eyes when she'd first seen Mia. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. "Marcus," he said, his voice low. The background check on Amelia Russo. I want the full file. Everything. Her family, her education, her financials. Now. Already on it, sir. Marcus's voice came back, calm and professional. There was a flag in the initial check I wanted to follow up on. It's unusual. I've sent the file to your secure server. Arthur walked into his office, the room a fortress of technology and power. He sat at his massive obsidian desk and opened the file. Russo Amelia. He scrolled past the basic information, date of birth, address, social security number. He saw the Juilliard acceptance, the note about her parents, members of the Philharmonic. Then he saw the financials, a mountain of debt, eviction notices, and a line item that made him pause. Pending lawsuit, Russo Estate versus Van Doren Transport. He clicked on it. The legal documents filled the screen. 5 years ago, the truck that had run the red light and killed Mia's parents was owned by a subsidiary of Van Doren Global, Beatrice's family company. The case had been settled out of court for a pittance, the driver taking full responsibility, the corporation absolved of any fault due to a supposed brake malfunction. The air in the room grew cold. Beatrice had never mentioned this. She knew who Mia was. This wasn't a random encounter. Arthur's mind raced, connecting the discordant notes into a horrifying melody. Beatrice hadn't just seen a waitress with his daughter. She had seen the daughter of the people her family's company had killed. A loose end, a potential threat. But it was circumstantial. It didn't prove what happened with the piano. Then Arthur's eyes drifted to the corner of his office ceiling. A small black dome, nearly invisible against the dark wood. A security camera. Beatrice was meticulous about avoiding the cameras in the main hallways and Clara's room. She was vain and image-conscious, but she always forgot about the one in his office, which had a wide-angle lens that covered a portion of the living room. It was there for corporate security, to monitor for espionage during sensitive meetings. "Computer," Arthur said, his voice tight with a dreadful premonition. "Access archive, camera 7. Today's date. Play footage from 3:15 p.m. to 3:45 p.m. The monitor flickered to life. The video was crisp, the audio crystal clear. He watched in silence as Mia and Clara sat at the piano. He saw the gentle way Mia guided Clara's fingers. He saw the pure, unadulterated joy on his daughter's face as she picked out the simple melody. It was a joy he hadn't seen since her mother was alive. Then the elevator doors opened. He watched Beatrice enter, her face a mask of contempt. He heard every venomous word. Who is this person? Associating with the help. He saw Clara's fear, saw her hide behind the one person who had made her feel safe. He saw Mia stand up for his daughter with a quiet courage he hadn't seen in anyone in his circle. And then he saw it. Beatrice, her face twisted in a snarl of pure malice, striding to the piano. He saw her grab the lid and slam it down with vicious, calculated force. He saw Mia snatch Clara out of the way just in time. On the screen, Clara screamed. Beatrice, for a split second, smiled, a chilling, triumphant smirk, before instantly composing her features into a mask of shock and horror, just as the video showed him bursting out of his office. Arthur paused the footage. He zoomed in on Beatrice's face in the moment before she slammed the lid. The hatred in her eyes was pure, unfiltered evil. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had been played. He had trusted this woman, planned to marry her, planned to make her a mother to his vulnerable child. And she was a monster, a pathological liar who used his daughter's trauma as a weapon in her cruel social games. Arthur didn't shout. He didn't break anything. A terrifying, cold calm settled over him. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a war. Beatrice and her family had a vested interest in controlling him and his company. Sending Clara away wasn't just about convenience. It was about removing a variable, a potential complication in their consolidation of power. He couldn't just throw her out. The Van Dorens were old money, deeply entrenched in the city's power structures. A messy public breakup could be spun a dozen different ways. He needed more than a video. He needed to dismantle her, piece by piece, in a way she could never recover from. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed an ally. He needed Mia. Arthur grabbed his coat. It was nearly midnight when his car pulled up in front of the rundown building in Queens. The address from Marcus's file. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the smell of neglect and dampness filling his lungs. He knocked on the door of apartment 4F. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. Mia stood there, her hair down, wearing a faded college sweatshirt. Her eyes were red-rimmed but defiant. "If you've come to serve me with a lawsuit, you can give it to me," she said, her voice hoarse. "No," Arthur said, his own voice strained. "I came to apologize, and to ask for your help." Mia let out a short, bitter laugh. "My help? You fired me. You called me a liar. You humiliated me in front of your fiancé." "She's not my fiancé," Arthur said, the words tasting like poison. "Not anymore. I saw the video, Mia, from the office camera. I saw everything. She slammed the lid. She lied. I saw it all." Mia stared at him, her defensive posture slowly crumbling as she searched his face for deceit. She saw only a profound, gut-wrenching regret. She slowly unlatched the chain. "What do you want from me?" she asked, letting him into the small, clean, but threadbare apartment. "Everything," Arthur said, his gaze taking in the stack of bills on the table, the worn sofa, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. "Beatrice didn't just do this because she's cruel. Her family has been trying to orchestrate a merger with a rival of mine. They need my vote on the board. Controlling me, controlling my family life, is part of their strategy. The truck that killed your parents, it was one of theirs." Mia sank onto the sofa, as if her legs had given out. "I knew it," she whispered. "My father always said they cut corners on maintenance." "They buried it. They have the best lawyers money can buy," Arthur said, his voice hardening. "But I have more money. And now I have a reason to burn it all to the ground if I have to. The annual Children's Hospital benefit is in 2 days. Beatrice is the chairwoman. She'll be on stage, giving a speech about compassion and the welfare of children. The hypocrisy is staggering. I want to expose her, not just for what she did to Clara, but for what her family did to yours." He knelt in front of her, an act of supplication that was utterly foreign to him. "I can't do it alone. The video is damning, but they'll try to spin it. I need you. I need you to stand with me, to tell your story." Mia looked from Arthur's earnest, desperate face to the closed door of her brother's bedroom. This was bigger than a lost job. This was about justice, for her parents, for Clara, for herself. "I don't have a ball gown," she said softly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Arthur's face broke into the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. "Don't worry," he said, his voice resonating with the promise of utter devastation for their enemies. "I'll take care of the dress. You just bring the truth." The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a glittering galaxy of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the sound of power, murmured stock tips, political gossip, and the clinking of champagne glasses. At the center of it all was Beatrice Van Doren, radiant in a gown of emerald green silk, playing the role of benevolent queen. She stood beside Arthur on the dais, her hand possessively on his arm. "You've been so quiet tonight, darling," she whispered, offering a dazzling smile for a nearby photographer. "Don't be morose. Tonight is a triumph. After my speech, Daddy will announce the preliminary agreement for the merger. We'll be unstoppable. The merger is dependent on a great many things falling into place, Beatrice," Arthur said, his voice a placid, dangerous calm. "It's a done deal," she insisted. "Everything is under control." At precisely 9 o'clock, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Beatrice stepped to the podium, a vision of philanthropic grace. "Tonight," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity, "we are here for the children, to give a voice to the voiceless, to protect our most vulnerable. Every child deserves to feel safe, to be heard, to be nurtured." As she spoke, Arthur gave a subtle nod to Marcus, who was standing by the tech booth at the back of the room. "It is our sacred duty," Beatrice continued, her voice swelling with emotion, "to shield them from harm, to create a world of harmony and understanding." "A harmony you know nothing about," a clear, steady voice said. The ballroom doors at the far end of the room swung open. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a figure standing in the entrance. It was Mia. A collective gasp swept through the room. She was transformed. She wore a simple, elegant gown of midnight blue that shimmered under the light. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her only jewelry was a simple silver locket. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like justice incarnate. She began to walk slowly, deliberately, down the central aisle, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice hissed, her face draining of color. "Arthur, who is that woman? Is that the help?" Mia reached the stage and ascended the small set of stairs. She stood beside the podium, facing Beatrice, her expression calm and resolute. She took the second microphone. "My name is Amelia Russo," she said, her voice amplified throughout the silent hall. 5 years ago, a truck owned by Van Doren Transport ran a red light and killed my parents, both musicians with the New York Philharmonic. Miss Van Doren's family paid to make the story go away." A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. Harrison Van Doren, Beatrice's father, shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is slander. Security, remove this woman." 2 days ago, Mia continued, her voice unwavering, "I was hired by Mr. Sterling to care for his daughter, Clara, a beautiful, brilliant little girl who communicates not with words, but with music. We were making a breakthrough, finding a harmony that had been missing from her life. Miss Van Doren did not approve." Beatrice lunged for the microphone. "She's lying. She's an unstable, disgruntled employee." But before she could reach it, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the hospital's logo, flickered to life. The silent, high-definition footage from Arthur's office camera began to play. The entire ballroom watched in stunned horror. They saw the tender moment between Mia and Clara at the piano. They saw Beatrice's venomous entrance. And then they saw it, the brutal, violent slam of the piano lid, the splintering wood, the child's silent scream of terror. The video was looped, playing the monstrous act again and again. The audio then kicked in, broadcasting Beatrice's cruel words through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I have finally convinced Arthur to enroll her at the Atherton Academy in Switzerland. I will not have some back-alley piano teacher ruining my plans." Chaos erupted. The facade of polite society was ripped away, revealing the ugly reality beneath. Reporters were scrambling, their cameras flashing. Beatrice's society friends were staring, their faces masks of shock and disgust. Beatrice stood frozen, exposed and utterly annihilated under the glare of 1,000 judgmental eyes. She let out a raw, guttural scream of rage and denial, a sound eerily similar to the one she had mocked Clara for making. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, taking the main microphone. His voice was cold steel. "As of this moment," he announced, his words cutting through the pandemonium, "my engagement to Beatrice Van Doren is terminated. My company, Sterling Holdings, is filing a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against Van Doren Global for corporate espionage and conspiracy, and I am personally reopening the investigation into the wrongful death of Daniel and Maria Russo." He turned and placed a protective hand on Mia's back, a gesture of solidarity that was more powerful than any legal document. "This woman," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "is not the help. She is the only person who has told the truth in a room full of liars." He looked out at the sea of shocked faces, his gaze finally landing on the crumbling figure of Beatrice. "You wanted to give a voice to the voiceless. You just did." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The video from the gala went viral before the last guest had retrieved their coat. Pianogate, as the tabloids dubbed it, was a permanent stain on the Van Doren name. Their stock plummeted overnight. The merger was dead, and Harrison Van Doren was facing a firestorm of legal challenges and a board of directors baying for his blood. Beatrice became a social pariah, her name a punchline in the very circles she had once ruled. But the resolution wasn't a simple, clean victory. It was the beginning of a long, arduous process. The days that followed were a blur of lawyers, depositions, and relentless media attention. Arthur shielded Mia and her brother from the worst of it, moving them into a secure guest house on his country estate, a world away from their cramped Queen's apartment. The first true moment of peace came a week later. Arthur brought Clara to the guest house. The little girl, who had been withdrawn and silent since the incident, walked into the living room and saw Mia sitting at an upright piano Arthur had delivered. Clara's eyes lit up. She ran not to her father, but to Mia, and threw her small arms around her legs. "You came back," Clara whispered into her jeans. "I'll always come back," Mia promised, her voice thick with emotion as she stroked the child's hair. Over the next few months, a new, tentative harmony began to form. The legal battles raged on in the city, but at the estate, a quiet healing was taking place. Mia didn't act as a nanny or an employee. She became Clara's mentor, her friend, and the steadfast emotional center the family had lacked. They spent their days not in therapy sessions, but at the piano, exploring Mozart, Debussy, and the simple folk songs Mia's mother had taught her. Clara began to speak more, her sentences growing from single words to complex thoughts about music and the world. Arthur, for his part, underwent a profound transformation. He delegated more at his company, stepping back from the relentless pursuit of profit to learn the unfamiliar rhythms of fatherhood. He cancelled his international trips and instead attended every one of Mia's lessons with Clara. He was clumsy at first, a titan of industry, humbled by a simple musical scale. But he was present. He learned to listen, not just to board members, but to the nuances in his daughter's playing, to the unspoken emotions in Mia's music. One crisp autumn evening, Arthur found Mia on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. Leo, whose science fair entry fee and planetarium trip had been the first things Arthur had taken care of, was inside, happily setting up a new telescope. "Marcus tells me the Van Dorens offered to settle," Mia said, not looking at him. "A significant amount of money." "He's right," Arthur confirmed, standing beside her. Enough to ensure you and Leo would never have to worry about anything ever again. I told him to refuse, Mia said softly. It was never about the money. It was about the truth. She finally turned to him, her dark eyes searching his. My parents believed that music could bring order to chaos, that the right chord could resolve any dissonance. I think they were right. Arthur looked at this incredible young woman who had walked into his life and rearranged its entire composition. She had faced down his fiancée, stood up to his own arrogant blindness, and had done it all with a quiet integrity that humbled him. He had offered her wealth, but she had given him something far more valuable, his daughter's voice and his own heart. The penthouse in the city is so quiet now, he said, his voice raw with a vulnerability she had never heard before. It's just a collection of expensive things in a tall building. It's not a home. A home has music in it. He reached out, not to touch her, but to hand her a single, folded piece of sheet music. It was worn and yellowed with age. She unfolded it. It was a simple, handwritten lullaby. It was my wife's, he explained. She wrote it for Clara when she was a baby. It was the melody you were humming at the restaurant. I don't know how you knew it. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the familiar notes. I don't either, she whispered. It just came to me. It felt right. It was more than coincidence. It was a thread of connection, a melody of fate that had woven their disparate lives together. He didn't need to say the words. She didn't need to hear them. In the quiet of the evening, with the sound of a child's laughter and the distant promise of music drifting from the house, they had found their resolution. It wasn't a crashing finale, but a quiet, perfect chord that resonated with the promise of a new beginning, a symphony built not on wealth or power, but on truth, courage, and the simple, enduring harmony of a family, finally in tune.